I came at the tail end of Sister Zara Khan's talk because honestly that was the one thing that I swore I would attend from beginning to end, and then of course my 5-month-old baby has a cold and is having a rough morning. May Allah give him shifa. But I just, before getting started, I wanted to say that the content of her talk is extremely important. And I really hope that whatever you were able to glean from it, that you will share with other members of the Muslim community. These are the kind of topics that I think the younger generations are preoccupied with and oftentimes don't have the wherewithal to articulate and understand. So may Allah put barakah in Sister Zara Khan's efforts and her work. Very vital and very important. And I personally look to her as a role model. Okay, so this talk is about my personal experience as a Muslim-born sister who left Islam for a decade and then returned to Islam at the age of 28. One of the first things that I want to put out there in the atmosphere is I'm talking about my personal experience because this is something that a lot of young Muslims struggle with. What I don't want is to romanticize this experience. I don't want young and older folks walking away thinking that there's some sort of celebrity or something cool about apostasy or atheism or leaving the religion and coming back. I think sometimes when we hear stories about, people improving their lives and getting better, there's an element of just romanticization of these kinds of stories. And I don't want to do that. First of all, we should not be talking about our sins. Allah guides us to avoid doing that because I think this is one of the pitfalls that we can fall into. We can almost popularize those things. So really the only reason to talk about this is because this is something that a lot of young Muslims are going through and they're trying to find a way back. So, bi'ithnillah, hopefully there will be something that I say today that will resonate with anybody who may be going through that. So here are the responses to the question, in your experience, what's the main reason Muslims lose faith and leave Islam? And we'll just take a quick gander at this. I believe that Islam is a beautiful religion and there is no way one can leave Islam for any reason except a person who does not have love for Allah, okay? Feeling like they've fallen so far away from practicing their deen and not believing in Allah. Not believing Allah will forgive their sins. Lack of understanding Islam, parents don't invest enough in educating the future generation. Lack of support and true understanding of the deen. Weak faith, and this idea of weak faith keeps coming up. It's just being titled differently. Having no Islamic foundation from the start, that's what leads to weak faith as well. Thinking that the only way to do something traditionally non-Islamically is by compromising religious duty. Like I can't progress further in a field because I haven't seen any Muslim hijabis in it. Somebody said something here. Outside influences of non-Muslims, not having a strong base in your Islamic faith. You see how this theme keeps coming up? Not having a strong foundation, not having a strong foundation, not having a strong foundation. So I agree with much of this. This is not, I don't think any of us are really confused about what's leading to apostasy, what's causing us to go down that line. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the recipe for disaster in my personal life that led me down that path. For me, it was a combination of my childhood experiences, my home life, my personal life, the things that I was going through as an individual. And that includes weak foundation in Islam, as well as the things that we are all exposed to, the fitnas in this dunya, right? The different ideologies that we are combating, the allure of pop culture and pop culture figures, basically anything on the outside that we don't really have control over, that we're being fed constantly. And so those two things in combination, that confluence is what led to my leaving Islam and eventually believing that there could not be a higher power, astaghfirullah. So what I would like to do is to talk about each of these two things separately and then end with how the Quran brought me back to Islam. So let's take a look at childhood experiences and home life. In speaking with young sisters when I used to podcast and speaking with them during these closed door events, being a teacher of middle and high school students, I have had many hours listening to young Muslim girls in particular, and boys, but mostly girls, expressing a lot of the same thing. You know, that they essentially have not so great relationships with their parents. And that's not to say that the parents themselves are doing something wrong, or that the children themselves are doing something wrong. I think we're all doing the best that we can, and we are just struggling, in part because of the society and the lifestyle that is out of our control. We don't live in villages anymore, like our great-grandparents did and our parents did, where villages were the ones raising families, and it wasn't just on mom and dad to raise children. In many cases now it's just on mom, and so it makes it more challenging. And at the same time, youngsters are, especially, you know, as Sister Zahra Khan was saying earlier, that we are as much American as we are Pakistani, Arab, African American, wherever we come from. We're as much American as we are, you know, the other part of us. And we're always trying to reconcile those things. So for youngsters, and think about teenagers in particular, developmentally, teenagers, no matter what your background and religion is, you are going through identity formation as a teenager. Your brain is literally changing during that time. Your hormones are changing. And there's a lot going on biologically with you. So that makes it complicated even under the best of circumstances. So now compound that issue with competing ideologies and forces, where on the one hand, you're trying to live life according to the Quran and the Sunnah, but everything around you tells you not to, and to do otherwise. So, childhood experiences and home life. Here is the crux of it. There is a well-known Canadian doctor and psychologist. His name is Gabor Mate. I highly recommend his work. He co-authored a book called Hold On to Your Kids. Get that book. If you're a mom, if you're gonna be a mom, get that book. Hold On to Your Kids. It's an easy read, and if you are not a reader, the content of that book is also available on YouTube. The authors gave speeches, basically. They gave presentations. They presented their book. And here's what Dr. Mate says. Trauma is not what happens to you. It is what happens inside you as a result of what happened to you. Trauma is a psychic wound that hardens you psychologically, that then interferes with your ability to grow and develop. It pains you, and now you're acting out of pain. This, for me, was the crux of my poor decision-making as a teenager and eventually in my 20s, and what led me, in part, to leave Islam. The confluence of things that happened in my home life and the environment that I grew up in, and my parents were great parents. Like, I'm not throwing them under the bus. I have a wonderful mother and a wonderful father, and they did the best that they could. However, they also lacked a lot of knowledge and skill in parenting a girl growing up in the United States, right? Like, there's nothing that they could have, I think, done, because they were the first. They were immigrant parents. They brought back, they brought to the United States what they knew from Palestine and Syria, and it just didn't always work in our environment. And then every family has their own, I think, circumstances that lead to certain traumas. I did watch my parents argue a lot, and now as a parent, one of the #1 rules between my husband and I is we do not argue in front of our child, even though he's only 5 months old. The first 6 years of life are the most impressionable. Your child can't speak, but I promise you, he or she is a sponge, absorbing everything, even your smile, your mood. And to prove this, I was putting my baby to sleep one night in the dark, and I was holding him, and I was tearing because I was so exhausted. that was literally it. That was the reason I was crying. I was just exhausted. And I wasn't making any noises or anything. I was completely silent, and he started crying. He just started crying. He woke up from his sleep and he started crying. I turned the lights on, I smiled at him, and he smiled back, and he was fine after that. Okay? So your children are very attuned to your moods, to your tone, to the behavior, to the atmosphere in the home. Nothing pleases a child more than seeing his parents in love and respecting one another. The tone that you set in your home, the order that you create in your home, the cleanliness, the routine. This is why being a mother is not easy, and this is why it's equally important, and why I get so upset when we bash motherhood, because it's very difficult, and it's one of the most important, if not the most important jobs any woman can ever take on. Your child will feel it and will pay for it in good or bad ways, and it's you who decides. So there were lots of things that happened in my home unintentionally that led to trauma for me. And I'll just use one quick example. That when I was 11 years old, I had just finished elementary school, I was going into middle school. My mother, who's from Syria, her brother got really sick and she had to fly out to Syria for the summer to be with him. I have two younger sisters as well. And for whatever reason, my visa did not come in, it wasn't approved. This was in 1997. And the tickets were already booked. My mom and my sisters had to go. They just had to, otherwise they would lose, all the money that was paid for the trip. In addition, my uncle was dying. Allah yarhamah. So my mom and my sisters went, and I stayed behind. My father, unfortunately, suffers from a series of different mental illnesses, and he did not have the capacity to care for me by himself. Keep in mind, I'm 11 years old. Okay, so prepubescent, right about to enter, puberty, a lot happening developmentally. And up until that point, I was very much a mama's girl. I was very introverted and shy and under my mom's wing. I was that girl sitting under a tree reading a book while the rest of the kids were running around playing tag. I was bullied as a little kid because of those things. But that summer changed me forever. Because my father wasn't able to take care of me, there were a couple of nights where I ended up sleeping outside in the street. I almost got kidnapped. There was a lot of trauma that occurred. And so basically, even though you're a kid and you can't explain and articulate your needs and what's going on with you, when you experience things like that, it changes the chemistry in your body. It changes you. And that's what Gabor Mate is saying here. Something inside of you changes. And if you're a sensitive individual to begin with, if that's your predisposition, it can be ever more problematic for you. Even though that was my specific experience and my sisters didn't go through that, there were other things that my sisters did go through in the same household that we grew up in, but the three of us absorbed that trauma differently. The middle child is very resilient, very strong, doesn't like to talk about her emotions, and she coped in a very different way, and in large part that's because of how Allah created her. She has a different disposition. She's not as sensitive as I am. And so it's extremely important that when you, as mothers, are thinking about whatever struggles your children might be going through, it's important to seek counseling when needed. There is nothing shameful nor haram in seeking counseling and therapy and the work and support of experts in the community. And I know that there's a lot of stigma and taboo, especially in the Arab community around that. And we don't want to have people talking about us, but we really have got to put our children first. What is more important? What the community is going to say about you if they find out that your child, sees a therapist once a week, or your child actually getting help and not leaving the fold of Islam. You would pay exorbitant amounts of money to help your child heal, right? So who cares what people think? You're not living for them. Okay, this is the book that I had mentioned to the parents. And here's a quote from one of those co-authors. "Children do not experience our intentions, no matter how heartfelt. They experience what we manifest in tone and behavior." So this goes back to what I was saying about my household. I consider my mom to be one of the best mothers to have ever walked this earth. And yet, I still struggled. I still, experienced trauma. So don't think that if your child is going through something that you're a failure as a parent. That doesn't make sense. first of all, you're not perfect, and you're not the be-all, end-all reason why your children struggle. They're going to struggle whether you do everything right or not, because that's the promise in this dunya, that we're going to be tested. But what is important is that you pay attention to the choices that you're making on a daily basis. So one thing that I remember being so frustrated by growing up, seeing my aunts and my mother's friends, you know, when we visit our neighbors and we're sitting around, there's this tendency to engage in a lot of female-to-female conversation while the children are around. And when the children try to get involved, we shoo them away. First of all, it's extremely important that children are in an environment that is reflective of society itself. That means multi-generational experiences. Children should not always be with their age group. I'm going to say this again. This is extremely important, and this is me speaking as an educator. Children should not only and always be with their age group. And this is one of the arguments made in this book. Today, now, and this has never occurred in the history of human civilization before, children are looking to each other. Peers youth are looking to each other for affirmation and guidance and wisdom. Growing up, we were taught that we respect our elders, that they have wisdom, that we learn from them, we look to them. Now, the youth look at older generations like they're antiquated and outmoded and they don't know any better and they're stuck in the past and they need to be changed. Okay, and part of the reason for this is our education system that funnels children into the same age groups and they only ever play with each other all the time. But the other part is like, we're not paying attention to giving youth enriching experiences while they're with us. You know, throwing them a toy or giving them something to keep them busy, that's not sufficient. Every minute, every waking moment is a vital learning moment for your child. He will absorb and she will absorb whatever you put in front of them. So create the conditions that are necessary to bring up a healthy individual. So now let's talk about society and the fitnas of the dunya. Here is an important hadith that I think captures what many of us are going through as far as crisis of faith is concerned. Shaitan will come to one of you and he will say, "Who created this and that?" until he says to him, "Who created your Lord?" When it comes to this, let him seek refuge in Allah and stop such thoughts. This is from Sahih Bukhari. And the Prophet in another hadith responded to this by saying, "Let him," Bani Adam, say, "I have faith in Allah." What this is capturing is, and I said this in a previous talk, Shaitan is resilient. He is so resilient and so patient. And he will be after you over and over, whispering in your ear over and over and over and over, until eventually this fallacy takes over your mind. And for me, this is exactly what happened. This is what happened. It begins with little things like, you know, why do I have to pray? Why do I have to wear hijab? And it's not that it's wrong to ask those questions, you know, seek knowledge. That's what we're told to do. But there is a dangerous, slippery slope to the why question. Okay, there's a dangerous thing that occurs when we go down this path. And I'm just going to say it like it is, and I know this is going to come off as a little bit rude, but bear with me. Most of us, myself included, most of us don't have the intellect to handle this kind of thinking. You understand what I'm saying? Allah created our minds in such a way that we can only fathom certain things. We can't imagine Jannah. No matter how many times it's described, right? We cannot fathom it. We cannot fathom the day of judgment and what the world is going to be like at that time. And yet we know that those things will come to pass. So how can we wrap our minds around God's existence? The idea that there is a creator who is uncreated. We only know things that are created, right? Everything comes from somewhere. We came from somewhere. Our mind is so limited that we can't imagine what it means. So Allah says, do not contemplate the Prophet, I'm sorry, says, do not contemplate Allah's existence, contemplate His creation, and then you will know. And then you will understand, because that's what we can understand. Okay? Now, if you are interested in understanding a little bit more about this particular question, Abu Amina Ilyas, who I think also works with Yateen, the Yateen Institute, he's got a wonderful post on his website called If Allah Created Everything, Who Created Allah? And he lays out this argument. And it's pretty simple, you can understand it, and I would say after you've read that, tell us, leave it alone. Leave it alone. It's a circuitous debate in your mind that you will never be able to solve. I promise you, I spent 10 years trying to figure it out. It's gonna get you nowhere. As far as atheists are concerned, during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, non-believers, atheists, were far and few between. I mean, they weren't even taken seriously back in the day because they were just such a minority. You know, most of the debates that occurred were between believers of different traditions. But there's an ayah in Surah Al-Jathiyah that says, and they say, there is not but our worldly life. We die and live, and nothing destroys us except time. And they have of that no knowledge, they are only assuming. And this is referring to, I don't want to mispronounce it, I think they're called the Dahriya. And these are the people who are concerned with, did I pronounce that correctly? Dahriya, yeah. So these are the individuals who were concerned with the dunya, right? Time. And that God doesn't destroy us. It's not, there is no afterlife. The only thing that destroys us is time. We're born, we live, and we die. And that sounds very reminiscent of what atheists believe today, right? And so this is mentioned in the Quran. So I put this image here because this is a good portrayal of what happened to me when I went away to college and I started to study philosophy and religious studies. I got very lost in the rabbit hole, right? How many of you have heard of the rabbit hole and Alice in Wonderland? What happened to her when she fell down the rabbit hole? One psychedelic experience after another, right? Little Alice fell down the hole, bumped her head, and bruised her soul. Perfect. That's exactly what happened to me. I started asking questions that I was not prepared to ask, and because my background in Islam was super weak and I didn't really have a foundation, I got swallowed up by everything in the dunya. And that went on for 10 years. And eventually, this is what happened to me as well. Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anh said, he who does not live in the way of his beliefs starts to believe in the way he lives. And this is what I see with a lot of young Muslims today, where we justify things that are un-Islamic to the point where we start believing that we're justified in those things. Right? It's like if you tell yourself a lie long enough, you start to believe your own lie, and you almost forget, wait, did that really happen? Is that really true? I can't even remember because I've repeated it so many times. And this is exactly what happened to me. Because I did not have the moral compass of Islam to guide me, I started to absorb a lot of Western philosophy and a lot of the ideologies that we've been talking about this weekend. And so eventually, that's the way that I started to live. It wasn't until I got divorced. So I was married once before. I got married when I was 25. The marriage lasted about 2-3 years. And then I got divorced. It didn't work out. But that divorce triggered a series of other events that eventually brought me to rock bottom. For me, it was like Allah was saying, okay, have you not had enough? Have you not learned your lesson, Nour? Do you really want more of this dunya? And almost just an inch away from being literal, I did hit rock bottom. I lost everything. Everything. The least of which not being my own self-respect. And so after the divorce, I was around 27, 28. I moved back home with my parents. I quit my job, and I engaged in a process of self-reflection. And by self-reflection, I mean I stopped blaming everybody for the nonsense that was going on in my life. I stopped blaming even shaitan. Like I was like, you know what? I did this to myself. Everything good in my life came from Allah, and everything bad, I brought it onto myself. أنا ظلمت نفسي. I victimized my own soul. I did this to myself. And the same way that I got myself here, I'm going to get myself out of here. The same way that I did this to myself, it is my responsibility to fix this. Up until that point, I always thought to myself, why should I pray? I don't feel it. Like, don't I have to feel something before I pray? That's the way that I thought. And then, in the process of critically self-reflecting, I came upon this hadith Qudsi. Take one step towards me, I will take 10 steps towards you. Walk towards me, and I will run towards you. Wow, I'm getting emotional. Yes, exactly. And I prayed for the first time after 10 years. I'm sorry. I never get emotional when I talk about this. But this is what it felt like after 10 years of just being lost and not knowing who I was, what was going on in my life. I kneeled down to Allah and I prayed, and I think I was in sujood for maybe like 20 minutes. I don't even know. And I just cried and cried and cried, and it was the first time that I felt like, of course He exists. How could you ever have doubted that? Like, of course He exists. And, you know, you can't prove it, just like I've been saying, we can't prove Allah's existence, but knowledge is not only empirical. It's not simply the things that we get from our senses. There's fitrah. We're born with fitrah, intuition. There are things that we can't explain through our senses, but we know it in our hearts. We feel it in our hearts. And when I returned to Islam, I felt right away like this. There's no way that He can't exist, and I can't explain it, but it's there. And simply by asking Him, saying to Him, if You exist, help me, help me, help me. Bring me back to You, and don't ever let me go this time. And this is a dua that I make every single day. I never want to ever go back down this path. It's a very dark road, ladies. It's a very dark road. It's a very lonely road. I know that there's a lot of allure in this dunya, and there's a lot of things pulling at our nafs. But once you've satisfied those things, you're going to find yourself in the worst situation. You will not respect yourself. You will lose all respect for yourself. And that's hard to recover from. I mean, I have friends who were not able to recover from that. And this is one of the surahs that meant the most to me. It's from Surah Al-Alaq. Read in the name of your Lord, who has created all that exists, has created man from the clod. Read, and your Lord is the most generous, who has taught the writing by the pen, has taught man that which he knew not. As far as guilt is concerned, if you feel guilty when you're transgressing, say Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah, that means there's still, Allah is still there. He's still guiding you. For 10 years, I didn't feel guilty about anything. Don't write your moms off as like they don't know anything just because they didn't grow up here. Okay? They have a lot of wisdom. They know far more than you think, and they're protecting you. They're trying to protect you from something. I remember, you know, when I was in college, I would come back on the weekends and try to have these debates in all my hubris, you know, with my mom about God doesn't exist. And my mom's not a sheikha. She can't, like, articulate what she's trying to say. But lo and behold, she was right and I was wrong the entire time. For those of you who are teenagers, and actually, you know what, moms too, choose your circle wisely. They say that you can judge a person's character based on the 5 people that are closest to them. It's true. So ask yourself, who are the 5 people in my life that I spend the most time with? Even if that's like your social media feed, those role models that you follow on social media, you know, those are people too. So ask yourself, who are those people, and are they strengthening my iman or are they weakening it? Because those are the only 2 options. The way that you spend your time, everything that you do is either leading you to become closer to Allah or to get further away from Him. And I love these 2 quotes by Umar ibn al-Khattab. By the way, I spent a lot of time studying Umar ibn al-Khattab's life when I was coming back to Islam. I don't know why, I just found he resonated with me a lot. I just found him to be this incredible character in Islamic history. 1, because he was so harsh on injustice. And 2, because he was a no-nonsense kind of guy, right? He says that avoidance of sin is lighter than the pain of remorse. So if you can avoid making the mistake, it'll be way easier for you than to live with the regret. But he also said, sit with those who have sinned and repented, for they have softest of hearts. So this is a nice balance of 2 things, that it is our goal always to avoid making human error, because we pay a price. But that doesn't mean that there's never a way back. Allah is all merciful and all forgiving, and we have until our dying breath to return to Him. We don't want to wait until our dying breath, because you never know when that's going to be. Okay, so lastly, I'm wrapping up. I wanted to leave you with some resources. Here's my website. It's nourmgoda.com. nourmgoda.com. And up here, if you click on resources, I've created Google Docs on various topics. So if you click on, let's say this topic here, faith and doubts, it'll take you to a Google Doc. And I've included articles and videos and books of things that helped me when I was on my journey back. And I've tried to keep it as organized as possible. And I update this constantly because learning never stops. But here's a section on doubts and faith. And then for anyone who has particularly intellectual children who like to debate and who are eager to get into philosophy, there's some resources here on secular liberalism and feminism, the LGBTQ and transgender movements, because all these things can lead to apostasy, right? These are all things that affect our faith. And then I also included a section here on changing your habits and achieving your goals. One of the things that I think we can do a better job at as Muslims is improving how we use our time and how we manage time. First of all, we have to stop showing up late to things, okay? It's, I mean, apart from it being a waste of time, it's distasteful. You know, it sends a very bad message about who we are. And we don't want that message lingering around us. So these are the 3 books that have helped me change habits. And if there are any other resources that are interesting to you, there's stuff here on marriage, parenthood, homeschooling, sexuality. These are all ebooks that are part of the public domain that I have read and that helped me to develop my iman. I want to recommend to the moms in the room that you take a look at this resource here because it's a new one. It has nothing to do with atheism, but, well, not nothing, but it's kind of further from the issue. How to respond to the transgender issue. This is a very current resource that came out, and it's very, very good. So I wanted to put a plug in there for that. I hope that this ends up being something useful to those of you. I'm sorry that I broke down. It's the first time ever. And I thank you for your patience with me. If I have said anything that was a transgression, may Allah forgive me. And Jazakallahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum.
I have a question. Is there like a #1 resource that you would recommend for someone who's struggling with their faith?
The Quran.
Next to the Quran. Like a book that you would recommend that talks about, for example, the existence of God or something?
Yes. Hamzat Sortzis. How many of you know who Hamzat Sortzis is? Watch his videos online. He's a helpful oh no, I think it's called The Divine Reality. Here it is, The Divine Reality by Hamza Sortzis. It's a very useful, it's a little bit dense, but if you're somebody who enjoys philosophy and you enjoy logic, then this is a good resource that addresses some of the most common arguments regarding the relationship or conflict between reason, science, and religion. And he argues that they're not mutually exclusive, that they explain one another. Sure, yeah. Yeah,
we can do 10 minutes of questions, and then we'll have to end. But
sure, yeah.
Okay.
I just wanted to add one book that really helped me was Shahbaz's book, Important Lessons That Every Muslim Should Know.
Yeah.
It literally goes from zero all the way. And it's not that long to read. It's like less than 200 pages.
Yeah.
And it goes like from fact to how, what it means, all the way to what is Iman, what is Ihsan, what is...
Just like love, yeah.
What advice do you have if you know someone and really want them to come back to Islam because they left Islam for another religion?
Yeah. So, first and foremost, we have to remember and understand that Allah decides the destiny of every single soul. It's obviously we do da'wah and we're supposed to lead by example and live by example, but it's in Allah's hands. The Prophet himself, alayhi salam, could not convert every, kafir. So we have to remember that. I just want us to keep perspective of the fact that we cannot change everybody. Okay, and we should not be hard on ourselves. We make dua for them, we live by example, and we leave the rest to Allah. So that's one thing. The second thing I was going to say is that if it wasn't for me, if it wasn't for the way that my mom never sat down and tried to force feed me Islam, ever. She lived by example. And watching her toil every single day throughout my entire life was a blessing because it showed me what a pious Muslim woman is like. The way that she endures, how patient she is, how she doesn't give up her iman during difficult times. In fact, when times are difficult, her iman increases. So leading by example is the best thing we can do. I'm not a fan of debates, to be honest with you, especially formal debates, because I think that it just entrenches people more in their views. I think when you can have off-the-mic conversations, one-on-one, just normal human interaction with people, you're way more likely to leave behind something that will touch their hearts. That's why I like the closed-door sessions, because I think just connecting with humans on a very casual, authentic level is way more effective. And I've learned this from my experience as a teacher as well. It's way more effective than like, I'm going to stand here and I'm going to convince you why Islam is the truth. You've already put people on the defense when you do that. And also like, da'wah is a science and an art. I don't consider myself a da'i, and I don't ever want anyone to consider me a da'i. Sometimes I even struggle to accept invitations like this because I think that it's important to know what you're doing when you're speaking in front of a crowd because it can go either way. You might say something, that will tip somebody over in the wrong direction. So be careful to assume the role of trying to get somebody to come back to Islam. There are people who study da'wah, right, and how to do da'wah. But the best thing you can do as a lay Muslim is just live by example, I think. I hope that answers your question.
do you need a mic?
Sure.
So one is, how do we create resilient children? Because trauma is never goes away. And two, how do we connect with our children in a way that draws them emotionally? Not just teach them how to pray and fast and what Quran says,
Yeah.
but attach their hearts to Islam.
Yes. Did everybody hear her question? Questions? Okay. So the first one was, how do we create resilient children? The second one was, how do we get children to be connected to us? I'm going to answer the second one first. This is why I recommended that book, Hold On to Your Kids, because that book literally answers that question. Okay? Raise your hand if you feel like you have a great relationship with your mother. Even the mothers in the room, anybody. You have a great relationship with your mother. Okay, what about that relationship made it great? Communication, understanding, empathy, instincts, distance. Distance? What do you mean by distance?
Sometimes like being in the house, like do this. Okay, like you need your own time.
So understanding. Again, understanding. Okay, so understanding, communication, empathy. Anything else? Yes.
Going through the difficult situations.
Yeah, definitely. Whereby you probably experience empathy and understanding, right?
Sometimes just having a common interest brings you together.
Yeah, sure.
I know this with my kids, and I'll show you with my mom.
Yeah.
We find something that's stuttering. My kids are old enough, like a puzzle. Whatever it is,
Yep.
we just sit down and that brings them home house.
Very good. So everything you just said literally revolves around quality time. Quality time. Proximity is not enough. Your kids being, on your arm all day long is important. It is important that they're around you. But what are you doing with those minutes? It's very, very important. Moms are just as guilty as their teenagers and their children of being on their phones as often as they are. It's so funny because my mom is like the least tech-savvy person in the world. We got her an iPhone maybe a year ago or something. This lady, every time I visit her now, she's laying down on the couch, watching YouTube videos. And of what, Mama? What are you doing? Look at this crochet. Look at this upset shoe. She discovered YouTube, instructional videos on anything and everything. And I come all the way from Virginia. It's a 5-hour ride to spend time with her. She'll sit with me for 15 minutes and then she's on her phone. And this is somebody who understood the importance of quality time. My mom literally would carve out every week, she has 3 daughters, she would carve out, this is from when we were like, 5 or 6, up until we got married and left, the home. She would carve out quality time with each of us, one by one. Because she knew I liked to go shopping and liked books. My other sister loved sports. And the other one literally just wanted to nap with my mom all day long. Like she was fine just laying in bed next to my mom. Rihat mama was enough for her. And my mom would always say no, this is my quality time with Nour, this is my quality time with Samak, this is quality time with Ahlam, and none of us were allowed to interrupt that time. Okay? So what you're doing with your time is super important. What you're doing with your kids is super important. They are very aware of you being distracted. And the older they get, as they get older, they're gonna know that when you're distracted, that is the perfect time to do what they're not supposed to do. Do not train them to disobey you. Do not train them to move away from you. Do not train your children to choose their friends to be their parents over you. Children naturally, human beings naturally, want to attach to somebody. It's called attachment parenting. They're looking, we're social creatures, we need to attach to something, someone. So they're either gonna attach to you or the next thing that's in front of them. And nowadays, more and more, it's their peers and their teachers and whoever's around them, okay? As far as creating resilient children, please stop doing everything for your kids. Let them make mistakes. Let them play in the mud. Let them scrape their knees. Let them get a scar. There's nothing wrong with that, okay? It's okay to get bruised and battered. It builds character. It builds resiliency. It builds grit. It's important for your children to make mistakes. So, long story short, hang on to your kids, spend quality time with them, don't do everything for them, okay?
جزاك الله خير.